Today, we are going to talk about cybersecurity and how important it is not only for big corporations but also for startups. And you will hear many surprising facts from Tom. Tom is our expert in cybersecurity. Could you tell me a little bit why is cybersecurity such an important topic for startups?
Everything that we do in the business world nowadays is digital. That means from communicating to people to sending information to people. So it is really important that we know not only the capabilities of the technology that we're using, but of course also the limitations, because that's where the risk is. So companies need to look at really what are they using when it comes to digital services, their phones, their subscriptions, their cloud services. And we need to make sure that we truly understand that when we use anything in the world of technology, we are always talking about shared responsibility. And the actual impact of any kind of, future unexpected event, incident, maybe an attack, hopefully not, the quality and the impact of that will be determined by how well you know your part of the responsibility and where the other party begins. Now, you might be legally in the right and still lose all your data, or you can actually say, look, I don't have enough transparency. I will need to make different choices and to act accordingly so that I can bring down the risk, because ultimately it's not just your data, it's also going to be the information that you're storing of your customers and your suppliers.
What are common issues customers, clients come to you to solve when they have already some problems with cybersecurity, with maybe with legal, with fines or something? Do you have some stories from that?
Oh, there's plenty of examples to draw from, but I think for a lot of people working in startups, because we're still all people, people don't really understand what's called the attacker taxonomy, which is how much does it cost an attacker to attack, and how do they do this? So there is a paradigm that has existed for at least 10 to 20 years called cybercrime-as-a-service. And the same way that you have, software as a service and platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, there is a thing called cybercrime as a service. And in that, cybercrime of a service, layered cake, there are all kinds of different businesses, you can call them, or business segments. And one of those is called initial access brokers. These are the people that scan the entire internet a few times a day, just trying default passwords, bad passwords, whatever it is. And the moment they can get into something, the password works, that gets put on a list, and those things get sold for usually big money. So when startups come to me, say, Tom, we don't really need that much security. I mean, who are we, right? I mean, there's so many other big companies to attack. You are talking with automated scripts that just want to find something that's open and they sell it. They don't care if you are the government or a company that makes milk bottles or whatever it is. They don't care. The fact that there is access and something to gain has a value. The fact that you have a computer that someone can use to do something else with has value. So usually I get called into companies to handle lots of deep technical problems, but not just that. A lot of the security that we nowadays take for granted is the security that we don't see or don't notice anymore. Seatbelts are seatbelts, but let's not forget that the car companies, they fought tooth and nail to not have seatbelts. And now they make security a selling point if you look at all the different car shows. So they've been able to make that switch. And for people working in companies, we also need to make that switch. So when I give workshops at companies on how they can make cybersecurity part of their DNA, part of their security culture, I have more work talking about how people use technology than the actual technical things. I mean, you just, you make sure that the end user doesn't have a complete list of choices. You limit their choices. You look at what they're trying to do. You look at their use cases, and then you try to find a way of, doing that in a controlled manner, right? I said controlled. I didn't say secure, because that doesn't really exist. Nothing in life is secure. So, but now that we know this, now we can move backward and say, okay, if this were to happen, can we see it? would we be able to see it if one of our customers tries to get into the account of one of our other customers? Things like that. So I helped them set up detection frameworks. I helped them develop a detection strategy. And I helped them to, make security, as said, part of their culture. And we're not going to gain security culture by brute forcing a multiple choice question once a year. Because a lot of that budget, in my opinion, can be spent on other initiatives that are going to give a lot more value. I mean, someone once said, and I agree that, Mr. Rick Ashley has probably done more for cybersecurity and security awareness by Rick rolling other people than, solving a multiple choice question once a year. That is for the internal audit department. That is for, larger corporations usually, to make sure that they have maturity when it comes to, a certain baseline of security. But that's not going to get people security on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, with multiple choice questions, you mean the typical approach for cybersecurity, probably in the bigger companies, or like for getting certificates, certain certificates, employees have to answer what will they do in certain situations, but it's too static and it's not real life appropriate probably. So you focus on a different approaches.
So let me give you an example of a story that I like to tell to audiences, is that you go on holiday and you come out of an airport that you don't know, in a country that you don't know, or a train station, doesn't really matter. And someone walks up to you with a pretty confident, stride, gait. And this person says, "Hey, Wilhelm, can I see your phone?" I mean, immediately alarm bells go off, right? Is this person going to steal my phone? There's pay phones right there. Why is he asking to see my phone? Is he going to steal my phone? No, wait. He's trying to, I've seen this on TV. He's trying to distract me because his friend is probably already. But you start thinking about your own defenses, right? If I take the exact same situation and I put it on email, I have people that will reply to me, attach whatever information that I'm asking for, because we are human beings. And because we lose our natural instincts when we meet people. You meet someone new, you shake their hand, takes you about 10 seconds to make some kind of idea about who that person is. That's also why when we all used to live in, caves, we are programmed to see sad and worried faces faster than happy faces. You put people behind a 2D metaphor or representation or analogy of the world, which is a desktop with a recycle bin and a file manager, and then they get an email where someone is asking certain things, all those natural instincts go away. So what are we left with? Security quizzes that say, if it looks a little bit blue, maybe don't click on it, but not on a Tuesday, and not when it looks like this. But guess what I use? Because as said, I break into companies for a living, and of course to help companies improve their security. And I advise on how they need to maybe look at security in a different way. But what I do when I get commissions to break into a company, I just look at all the resources that the company is already using. Company is using a certain cloud service to transfer files. Well, I will make an email that looks exactly like that, and they will click on it. Why? Because they're conditioned to click on it, because it's part of their normal tools. So why isn't that part of the actual conversation? Why don't we talk about the limitations that, these services that we're using? We need to be very sure that we know who's at the other end, because it's the internet. So there's a blank spot, and that blank spot needs to be addressed, I think. And that is what I'm trying to do as part of my startup.
Many platforms I've seen, they are scammers sending messages like they are from the platform. Even Facebook has this kind of approach. Not Facebook themselves, but on Facebook, there are people who named their account as something like Facebook support or something like that, or suspension, account suspension. And then you see, and the first time you see it, you think, oh no, my account has been suspended. I have to click on this form and fill it out.
Absolutely. And that's also what we've been seeing in the last 5 to 10 years, is that more than 90% of all the cyber attacks that we're seeing are based on a form of social engineering, phishing, or some form of manipulation. Because again, back to the attacker taxonomy, people tend to forget that attackers have budgets and managers too. So to give you an analogy, you and I can circle the castle every day to find a loose stone so that we can get into the castle, in the same way that bad guys are scanning the entire internet to find that one service that hasn't been updated or has a security hole. But that takes time. That takes money. So they can't do that. They want to get in now. So what do? They copy or spoof your corporate identity. They're trying to, again, back to the castle example, if there's people on their way to the castle, they're going to pretend that they're part of the castle services. We're just here, to clean your gold coins. If you can just give your gold coins to us, don't you know us? We're part of the castle. Look, we have the same color flag. So they're trying to spoof or impersonate the corporate identity. And unfortunately, companies, but also startups, are not good enough yet to anticipate these kinds of attacks because they lack the knowledge about how attackers really function and operate. There is a fundamental disconnect between the ways of thinking of an attacker and a defender. Defenders don't really and you and I are both defenders, right? We have email accounts. We have everyone that uses a service is by definition a defender, so to speak. Again, shared responsibility. But end users, companies, organizations, startups, they don't really understand how an attacker might be able to get information about them. So I might be able to get, your birth date or the fact that you're a fan of, I don't know, Pokemon or whatever it is, because it's information that I gathered based on maybe 20 years of your online life. But you forget kind of the things that you've put in different services, right? But when those things leak and an attacker can put them together, then they have an advantage on you. And people tend to forget that these things exist. So they put trust in the fact that I name drop a few different things just to kind of lure you in and to establish trust. And at a certain point, I only need one real person to click on something that I've sent them, and then I'm in the company. But that's where the second stage starts. Because a company, their security or the success of your startup should not be dependent on one person clicking the wrong thing or letting one person into the building that shouldn't be there.
Before we go into how entrepreneurs and startups can increase the safety and security with reasonable efforts and resources, I would like to mention a few small cases of attacks.
Sure.
I know a company that had a big issue. So the accountant received an email as if it was from the owner to accept this invoice, so approval of this invoice, and they wired hundreds of thousands of euros to this company, and it was gone. That was like one of the biggest issues I've heard. And in our case, we oftentimes had some issues with our WordPress website. Sometimes, like not. Someone hacks it and then links to a scammy website on the website. That's more common, I guess,
Very
especially
common.
with WordPress with thousands of plugins. So I guess it's also the diversity, what is possible. Not many people are aware. They maybe have some ideas of hackers and from movies, but the reality is it's much closer and much easier and much more riskier for startups than they might think.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, what you're describing is just all too common for companies. But again, and it's of course easy to stand over someone that just had a car accident and say, I would have worn my seatbelt. But if these things are possible and things are just these transactions of six-figure numbers of amounts are possible just by a matter of an email, then maybe that's the first part to or the first starting point to address, obviously. But attackers will, of course, also try and obtain how you're doing things. Do you have, for example, what's called the 4i principle? Like one person can create accounts can create payments, but can't put them through the system and vice versa. But you have to always keep in mind that an attacker is lazy and they're on a budget. Again, attackers have budgets and managers too. My guilty pleasure sometimes is watching these streamers that try to scam the scammers, and they waste their time. You can hear the reaction on the other end of the line, right, from the scammer, and when they feel that they've been scammed, because it's a huge loss of time and thus money for them. So that only proves that there is a structure, an economy in place, so to speak. The problem, and again, the challenge that you're mentioning is something that I see almost every day, which is if you have no security and you think that, it's not going to happen to you, my cloud provider will handle it. We're a startup. We're not too big. Security can wait. We have nothing of value. We're too small. All of that goes out the window, obviously, after your first attack. But it's a matter of looking at how these things could play out, what kind of choices we are giving a would-be attacker. As said, an attacker is always lazy. And how can we turn this actual strategy to our advantage? Most people think that their intranet.companyname.com or whatever is a cozy server sitting in the basement. Those things are in the cloud now. And the kind of cool thing with the cloud is that if you can access Office 365 from the toilet, then guess what? So can I. So attackers will always be lazy, and they will always try to get in, ways that you probably didn't expect. So if you have someone that can look at that and look at what we call attack path mapping in the industry, we just look at all the different things or all the different ways that someone could abuse your functionality or access data or have some kind of interaction with you and your employees and your suppliers in a way that maybe you didn't notice. And maybe you don't need. Because why have budget for traffic lights for roads that you don't actually need? So, for example, when I get asked by banks to break in and to, for example, transfer €1 from one account to another, I will try different ways of doing that. Now, of course, they will tell me which ways they're interested in, but I will always add like a little flair of my own, which means I've been able to transfer money just by walking into a bank. Hello. My grandmother is very sick. She would like very much me to be one of the custodians of her bank account. Here's the actual form. Could you make me the custodian of the bank account? And they take the form, because what attacker would just walk into the bank? And then they clear the form and they check it off. And now I have complete access to the bank account. So as I keep saying, attackers, with more than 90% of attacks coming from phishing and social engineering, attackers want to log in. They don't want to hack because it's cheaper for them and it saves them time. Once we know all the different vectors, that is where we can kind of let go of this paranoia. Once we deep down understand that the attacker can be everywhere, but they cannot be anywhere, right? There's only so many devices around you. An attacker is not magically all of a sudden going to create a data connection out of nowhere. But when you're paranoid, when you don't understand how things work, that is where the magic comes in. A very typical example is, for example, people have been giving away their personal data for the last 20 years. But then when two people meet up as part of a family gathering and they just want to have a coffee and see where the next family vacation should go to, they log on to Facebook, and now they see that there's an ad for the exact destination they were discussing. Now all people are convinced that the phone is listening to them. Now, developers make mistakes, vendors make mistakes. Sometimes it does happen that things get recorded inadvertently. But your phone is not constantly listening to you and based on that trying to get rid of whatever is background noise versus what you're really talking about, context analysis, and then serving you ads. They can serve you ads in a way that you think they're recording. You know why? Because they don't need to record you. They have already such an ungodly amount of data on us that we've mostly been giving away, that we've come to the magical conclusion, the phone must be listening to me. Again, conveniently forgetting we've been giving away our data for the last 20 years. So this is kind of a good example of The adversary can be everywhere, but they cannot be anywhere. So once you know where the attacks might be coming from, well, now we can set up our detection and security strategy in a way that we can make the adversary make mistakes, that we can hopefully capitalize on with a detection strategy that is fit for your company, so that you only get the real stuff that you need to focus on, and you can focus on what's the most important, which is the reason why you made your startup.
Let's dive into solutions. We can start maybe with the basics, with the easiest one, and then progress with a bit more advanced solutions. So imagine software as a service startup. Which kind of advice would you give to do in the beginning?
Well, first and foremost, you're going to have to make a decision as far as what services do I want to use? Where are those services located? You might be getting a great deal for that cloud center somewhere in Asia, but if your clientele is sitting in Europe or the US, then the requirements and regulatory requirements and compliance requirements of your customers to be will be passed on to you. So you need to anticipate, where are my customers? Do I really need a global content delivery network cloud for my stuff? Where do I put things like email? How do I securely transfer a document? Where do I store my information? And what is going to be my backup solution? So, for example, the rule says that you have to have data in 3 different locations. That means one local, one in the cloud, and one that is, also physical, but then at a different location. So, because the discussion, of how to secure data and what to do with it kind of goes away the moment the data is lost through whatever means. So that's the first thing, which is data responsibility. How much transparency do I have as far as where my data is? Because guess what? That's the exact question your customer is going to ask you. So if you already do this from day one, and you put it in your founder documents, you put it as part of your mission, you put it as part of your customer to be will shortlist you. Because if you show that you see information security, cybersecurity as a proactive a proactive aspect of you doing business with them, and not just reactionary or tell us what you need and we'll do the bare minimum, you can make security a selling point for your customers. So that's the first step, which is data responsibility and knowing what kind of transparency you can expect from the suppliers that you've selected. Which brings us to the next part, which is, how do we access the data? Do we really need mobile banking on our phone when we don't do banking on our phone? Well, then it just becomes a liability. So that way of thinking. Now, don't think that you're going to be lucky, as we already talked about. Attackers don't care. They have a job to do, and if you just happen to be, on their menu for that day, then you're going to be on their menu. There's no 2 ways about it. So figuring out and making sure that you have a finite list of how your data can be accessed by you, your customers, your suppliers, and anyone else part of the equation. You put that down in a few pages, and then you start looking at, okay, is the way that we're securing this data, is that adequate and on the same level with the value of the data that we're trying to protect? So doing what we call in the industry threat modeling. Now, this does not have to be a 3-day workshop and offsite, right? It's very simple. Just make a list and put next to, in that table, put next to it, what are we using to make sure that the bad guys, or maybe someone that we have to work with, but don't want to give complete access, how do we make sure that we have an infrastructure and a way of working that is not all or nothing? That's it. We can talk about all kinds of complicated things like, discretionary access control and zero trust principles. And how do we make sure that we have a situation where the access to our data is not all or nothing? What do we need to access and when? Great. Now, when someone does access that data, how do we see that? Can I see that you contacted our service? Can I see what data you accessed? Really important if tomorrow you have some kind of dispute, some kind of quality assurance issue, or hopefully not, but maybe you have an incident or attack. So these might seem like very trivial things, but I don't see startups doing them. They're too busy, pedal to the metal and doing things, but that's all great. But again, my analogy of it's great to have 2 feet on the accelerator. if your brake is not adequate to your accelerator, it doesn't really matter how fast your sports car goes. It's going to go through the wall. And there's no way of going back out of the wall when that happens. So data responsibility and management, and knowing what kind of transparency you can count on, figuring out how you're accessing that data in the locations that you managed, and of course making sure that you plan for things not going the right way. Tomorrow something happens, we cannot access the data because our cloud service is down, or a truck passed and they knocked out the fiber network connection boxy thingy on the corner of the street. Okay, how do we continue our service? What are our customers expecting as far as our website being available, customer support, or our core services? And how do we reduce that risk? How do we make sure that we have some form of continuity? And can we build this continuity inside of the architecture? Because security should really be a key ingredient in your dish. It should not be a garnish or a topping. Because once the eggs are cooked into the cake, you can't get them out anymore. And I hope for you they were good eggs, because if they were bad eggs, well, guess what? It's part of the architecture now. So thinking about things that might happen, not just for your sake, but also your customer's sake, is going to be vital. All the rest falls under these three categories.
What are common mistakes you see in startups doing?
Well, as said, the common mistakes are coming from the stance that they think, or startups think, that they're untouchable. That just because they picked a large vendor, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Amazons, that they're going to be safe. As I mentioned, shared responsibility, and not knowing where that responsibility ends for you and begins on the other side, and handling the risk accordingly. There's many times where, for example, I get cut off in traffic and I'm going to have to push the brakes. I could press the accelerator and I would be 100% in my right according to the law. I would also be kind of dead where it doesn't matter anymore, right? So you might say, yeah, but if that happens, then we'll solve it legally. Well, again, the damage might be done, not just for you, but again, the liability towards your suppliers. And of course, the larger companies have the lawyers that you don't. So most of the challenges usually come from a different way of thinking that is not aligned with how the world of cybercrime today is used. A lot of startups are being targeted by cybercrime groups, organized crime groups. Why? Because they're expecting that the security is going to be lower or sometimes non-existent. So you are setting yourself up for failure. So think twice, reserve some time and thus budget to do the right thing. Have your security checked. But again, make sure that you understand the attacker taxonomy. I cannot tell you how many times I have interactions with startups and I ask them, should I test some of your software services? And they say, no. We did that last year and we didn't change anything. Yeah, well, just like the axis of a wheel, nothing changes to the axis of the wheel. Only literally everything else around you has changed. Attacks only get better and only get cheaper. So you need to align your defenses and the way that you're setting up your software services or whatever it is that you're doing. You need to set it up for, what we call the threat intelligence that is relevant for you, which is what attacks are the ones that you should care about and what can you do as part of your architecture to adapt to that. And again, I keep underlining it. You will not be able to adapt if your architecture is already set in stone 2 years ago because you think we'll do security later. That's not going to work. It's not possible to just revamp a building and go, actually, fire security wise, we should have maybe put that door there. Well, now it's too late. The building is built. So more than 80, I would say 80 to 90% of your security needs to come from your architecture and needs to come from, processes and knowing what the actual threat model should be, and everything else flows from that. And unfortunately, what I see in my day-to-day is that sometimes people, they kind of pass over a gear when they want to storm into the market and do things really fast. That's great, but you're going to spend an equal, if not more, amount of time trying to fix things that you might have missed or where you want to. Again, for all good reasons, right? For all the right motivations, but maybe you went a little bit too fast and you didn't think twice about certain aspects of security.
Could you give a couple of examples for wrong architecture? I can imagine if I'm a startup, I am using maybe Google Docs. I have my website. How can I make it difficult later on to make it more secure?
Well, first of all, you need to know how much you are controlling. So are you using a software as a service? Are you using infrastructure, a platform? All of that comes with certain responsibilities, of course. So a lot of the things that I see is just setting up software in a kind of next finish kind of way. So not applying security best practices, not using, assessments, or actually having someone look at the design or the architecture. A lot of companies, which is of course is normal, is they want to have people like me look at their access control. How would someone access our system? And do we need two-factor authentication? Do we need multi-factor authentication? All these things that we nowadays use on a day-to-day basis, which are normal now, which is great. But again, dear customer, dear startup, do you need passwords? How come you're saving passwords? The best way of securing a password is to not have the password. There's more and more services, for example, where you make an account and they say, what's your email? Well, people already have an email address, and we already have some security for your email address. And if you want to log in, they will send you a link that is active for maybe a few seconds. Then you log on to your inbox that you already have passwords for and already know, and then you click on the link. Now you're logged in. Would you like to save the session for maybe a day, a week, 2 weeks, whatever it is, depending on what you're offering and what the value is of the data that you're storing? And if you want to log in again, or you're logging in from a new device, yeah, we'll send you a new email. You've now brought down the risk to the same level that they already have, because if someone is able to access their email, well, guess what? They have a lot more access to stuff than just your account, right? But now you don't have to store passwords. And if tomorrow someone breaks into your company, what are they going to get? Certainly not the passwords that they can reuse somewhere else. Of course, they might still be able to steal, user data and stuff like that. But this thing where you now see on, for example, these breach forums where people are selling this data, I have this database of passwords and usernames and all that. Yeah, they'll be able to get the email addresses. But guess what? The email addresses were already public. So you have to think about the architecture. You have to think about ways of, okay, do we really need this thing? And why do we need it? Okay, that's a good point. And you write that down. So start with, the relevant conventions for what you are trying to do. Don't try to do the thing that someone else is doing, because every time you have data, well, guess what? That's not your data. You are the data custodian. You now get to hold that data for me. And if I request insight in that data, as part of, at least in Europe, the GDPR, you're going to have to show it to me. How good are you in showing me that data? Do you know where your data is? So just these questions alone, most founders that I speak with come with that specific question, which is, if tomorrow I need to track down my data, I would like to know where it is. I do not want to use the verb track down, because that implies that I don't know where it is. So making sure that you know where things are will give you a big advantage. And when you go to any, maybe you've gone to a information session evening from the police on how to better prevent your house from being broken into and burgled. What does the police always say? The intruder doesn't know the house. You do. So you have an advantage. So bring back that home court advantage for your organization, so that the attacker has to stumble around and hopefully trigger your silent alarms that you've placed there. And again, capitalize on the mistakes that your adversary might make. But of course, you need to know where your data is.
Which general advice could you give for choosing the software you want to use as a startup? For example, you could use customer relationship database or customer relationship software, and all those other task manager and so on. You could also choose between software as a service, or maybe a software that you download on your computer or on your server.
You want to look at what kind of security guarantees and transparency that the service you're using is going to give you. So if someone has a product or service and uses the word security or assurance or privacy, that's great. Those are great words, but they're words. Dear software company that I'm going to use or procure, can you show me a security assessment report that you've commissioned of the last year? And we don't need to see everything, but can you show us that, you actually have spent time on this? Because you and I can say whatever we want, right? So has that company, maybe it's a product company, maybe they make software. Have they already had security vulnerabilities found in the software? Because if I have to pick between two products, they're both 5 years old. One has had a few vulnerabilities and had to issue updates, and the other company has had zero vulnerabilities. I will pick the one that had a few vulnerabilities. Of course, it depends on what kind of vulnerabilities they had, but I will pick the one that had a few vulnerabilities. Why? Someone looked at the security and found something. And this company now had to act and solve it and had the uncomfortable meetings. So if tomorrow, if I'm a customer there, something happens, I'm not going to say it's a well-oiled machine, but at least they know the process. They know what to look at. They know how to do an impact analysis or to actually look at, what happened. What's our responsibility? What do we tell our customers? What do we tell the media? Do we pull in a lawyer? Do we contact law enforcement? I mean, they've been put through the ringer. I would rather pick that one than a company that has nothing and then says, yeah, we're really good at security. Yeah, that could be, but I need to see something to back that up. So look at how that company is dealing with security. And if they say we have ISO 27000, we have PCI DSS, we have DORA, that's fantastic. I mean, these other bigger frameworks, of course, are more thorough and strict when it comes to the auditing. But when someone says we have ISO 27000 compliance, that's great, but it is still just compliance. Yeah, we're NIS2 compliant. That's great, but that's for the auditors. And last time I checked, auditors are not going to attack your company. Criminals are. So are you able to look at your compliance? And are you able to extend your compliance efforts to the actual level of security that you want and that you need? And of course, where that bar is something that we talked about, as far as there needs to be a consensus on where you put that. So look at the assurances, test the software, look at what is being said versus what is being done. And also, when someone uses, for example, a web hotel or uses some kind of cloud service, and I interview the different people around the table and I ask them, what do you think about the security of the service? We've been there a customer for more than 10 years and we've never had problems. Really? So how many times a month or per year has this company contacted you to say that there was an attempted breach? If the answer is zero, then maybe someone is not doing their homework. Because every single IP address on the internet, every single server on the internet is getting loads of attacks every day. So at the very least, they should be reporting on how many attacks they might have stopped, what kind of attacks they were, level of sophistication. And if they don't, well, did you ask them? So sometimes it is just about asking the quote unquote stupid questions and going back to what is it that we need versus what is it that we want.
I'm not sure if Google Drive ever sent me something like, hey, we have been attacked or someone tried to attack. Maybe there is some kind of a website where I can check it.
For journalists, for politicians, they will tell you. So I'm afraid that you and I are just not that important yet. But when we're using more commercial services, so I mean, of course, people have their companies at Google and other services. But for those services, you can set up your own logging, your own detection. So it might be that it's not a managed service, but if you are using managed services, that's maybe a good question to ask. How much transparency are you going to give us as far as our current threat level? How are you guys going to respond to different threat levels? And if tomorrow the next supply chain attack comes along, because you might have heard about, the Oracle attack, you might have heard about, all these other supply chain attacks that we've seen. If that happens tomorrow, dear software supplier, what is your plan? How much transparency do you have that you can give us a good gut feeling that we can hopefully pass on to our customers and suppliers?
If I search for a software solution, do I have to ask them for those information, for those security breaches in the past? Or is there a platform, a central platform where I can check?
Unfortunately, there is not. So you, again, shared responsibility. You are going to have to ask them what they are doing when it comes to security assurance, when it comes to testing, when it comes to security as part of their DevOps process. If it's a managed service, they will already expect the question and hopefully already have documentation for you as far as what they are doing and not doing. But if you're using someone else's software, then you're going to have to ask a whole slew of different questions, which is to say, did you use secure development best practices? How are you storing credentials? How are you managing credentials? How are you making sure that my data is not exposed to a different customer's data? And depending on, and of course, you need a little bit of experience with this, but you can already tell from the language being used by vendors on whether or not they have security culture as part of their security, as part of their business. So, for example, when I ask, "Hey, I'm customer A. Can customer B, my competitor maybe, can they see my data?" Then it might be that the person across the table or in the conference call will say, "No. People, we make this data available only for you." Okay, that's one way of saying it. Or the person will respond, "Well, we're only exposing this data to you. It will not be exposed to anyone else." You use the word expose, not make available. That's back my analogy of defensive driving. That person is driving defensively. That person knows that whatever data you are making available is kind of exposing it. It sounds pretty dramatic maybe, but it makes a big difference because it means that person is dealing with security on a day-to-day basis. And you're just, question number 1 million, so to speak, from the list. And I would be more gravitating towards that company or that person because it seems that, they know a little bit more what they're talking about, maybe.
Is there a tendency that bigger companies, very famous companies, that they are more, software as a service companies, that they are more secure? I'm talking about huge providers like AWS, maybe even a bit smaller like HubSpot. If you compare smaller businesses with bigger, or is it depends on the individual company?
Well, larger companies, you mentioned Amazons and then the Azures and other cloud providers that, they've been put through the ringer. People wouldn't put their data there if, they weren't able to give at least certain levels of assurance. So yes, they have things better under control in the sense that they are able to offer you larger toolkits on how to secure your data. That's great. Do you know how to use them? Because how many breaches have we seen in the last 5 to 10 years where people are leaving these data buckets open or leaving databases open? The thing that has fundamentally changed in the last 10 to 15 years is with the cloud. We've now made developers mini administrators on their own little production islands. And developers at companies can spin up whatever they want. And how many times are they doing a security test? Is it once a year, once a quarter, if that? So there's continuous development and continuous improvement. We love saying that, right? Move fast, break things. How about the security, guys? Should the database be open to the entire internet without a password? Really? So it's great to have a whole bunch of tools, but you also need to know how to use them. Versus maybe we want something more than just kind of a toy play school lever with 4 buttons and 3 traffic light colors, right? Maybe that's also a little bit too simplistic. So we need to know what we're using, of course, and the tooling that we're getting. But we also need to know at a certain point where maybe, I have a small ship that maybe has a very small crew because I'm a startup versus the other ship that is using the same kind of ship as in the same infrastructure, but they have a follow the sun international team of people to manage it. Yeah, we're both using the same technology and the technology is great, but we will not really be able to use it. I can go to the shop right now and buy a really nice, Michelin star level knife. I can buy a really expensive kitchen. Doesn't mean I can cook. So you need to be able to, use the things that you're trying to benefit from as well, and you also need to know what the limitations are.
It seems to me that email and our mobile devices are pretty our big weaknesses. Correct me if I'm wrong. And maybe you can say some advice how we can navigate that. For example, I was thinking if it makes sense to change the email address and like signing up for different services using different email addresses, something like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, email, of course, is the most basic thing that everyone has, because nowadays it's very hard to do anything online without an email address and a credit card. But that's a different discussion. So, yes, being able to access email securely is crucial, knowing that it is kind of the stepping stone for all the different accesses that we have, whether it's personal or corporate. So, being able to defend your own email account and knowing which one to pick or what company and what information you want to get in there is going to be crucial. So being able to make sure that you avoid passwords as much as possible is crucial. So you can use things like, multi-factor authentication. So where you have to give a code from your phone or where you get an SMS. Those things are great to protect against password theft. These things, unfortunately, do not protect against phishing. So if you have something called a pass key, if you have something called a FIDO key, or these little like Titan keys or UB keys, or these little devices that you can use in combination with your computer, those are the ones that can protect you against phishing. So always be very mindful on what you log into. If someone says log in with Google, log in with some other service, you have to be very careful, because yes, you might be conscious about what you're giving away at that moment in time. But most of us have 20, 30, 40 accounts. I mean, it was fun in the beginning, right? But now we have all these different accounts. And after being in the security business for more than 23 years, I am currently convinced that people would rather rename their dog than to actually change their security questions if one of them leaked. And that's where we are currently. So we need to kind of pick our own, the devil that so to speak. And you're going to have to embrace the fact that, make sure that you know which devices have access to your email. Make sure that you know which devices are part of your bubble. I once read that lawyers that have to do with divorce, they love Apple devices because messages start popping up everywhere on all your devices. And if all of a sudden someone sees a recovery code, or someone is able to click on the reset password link with your email address in it, and then someone is able to see the actual code, now they can reset your account. So what I like to do and like to give as tips is to make aliases and use maybe a part of the service that you're using in your name. When I have to sign, if I want to order a pizza, this may be really stupid, right? But if I want to order a pizza and they ask me for my name and my email address, I have an email address that's meant for just takeaway. And as my name, as my middle name, I put the name of the company. So in 6 months, if I get an email that says "Hello, Tom Pizza," then I know the pizza place down the road got a breach. So obviously this has limitations, but knowing what you sign up for, making sure that you're using a password manager, really important, so that you don't have to remember passwords. You can threaten me with whatever you want. I know maybe 3 passwords, maybe. All the rest are passwords that are this long. They're passphrases. I don't know what they are. I just log on to my password manager. I look up what I'm supposed to log into, and I do log in, and it logs in for me.
Can you recommend a password manager?
It's hard to pin down one particular one. There are lots of open source ones that I like to use. So always pick the ones that, again, have received security testing. There's also commercial ones that can live on different devices. So I would say pick the one that is cross-platform. Pick the one where the actual password manager service does not have access to the keys, so that they are just hosting the data. They're hosting just a blob of encrypted data, and you're the one that actually has the access. But do not use the ones that come with, maybe some free services. I mean, Apple just released their own password manager as part of iOS. That's fine. So use the keychain, for example, if you have an Apple device. Use the password manager that comes with whatever Android version you're using. And for Macs, of course, you can still use the same one. For Windows computers, for Linux computers, I personally like Bitwarden because you can host your own service, but I definitely do not want to advocate for their services. I think you just have to look at what it is that you need on what platforms, and use whatever comes with the platform.
What about the password managers that are built into browsers like Chrome, Firefox?
Those are fine, but again, you have to look at what you are defending against. So most of those will give you all the passwords if you know the logon password. So if you're sitting at home and thinking, that one, the Amazon service that I have, I do a lot of shoe shopping. I'm going to make sure that my browser has the password for my Amazon account. Okay, because that needs to be secure. Okay, great. But then that runs on the family computer. And we all know the password of the family computer because the family does not want to, make user accounts for every single member of the family. And we all know that the password is 1234 because, the parents also need to use it, or, whatever it is. Well, now you've reduced your security based on that really easy 1234 password. So now that password manager that you're using inside the browser now kind of got the rug pulled underneath it, because now you've reduced security to the logon password. That's what I mean. You have to do threat modeling and looking at, okay, but wait a minute. It always asks me for the login password, and everyone knows the login password. So maybe we shouldn't do it. So there are password managers that will use extensions. There are ones where, for example, you have to use a mobile device to be able to open it on your desktop. So always look at different solutions where you have to use multiple devices, but always make sure that you have backup codes printed out physically and stored either somewhere securely or at some other place that you trust, in a sealed envelope, whatever it is. But as said, you just need to think about, again, the threat model as far as how could someone abuse this.
Great. Maybe one last question about the mobile device. Is there a way how to make it more secure so we can encrypt the mobile device, or what? I feel like if I lose my mobile device and if someone can access it, then it's like a catastrophe. There is all those two-factor, all those banking, and sometimes banking is on the same device to verify, so it's not very reliable.
Well, again, it depends on what kind of device you have and how recent it is. So if you have an Apple device, an iOS device, then the device is already encrypted. For Android, it will also be encrypted. Again, Android is the name of an operating system. iPhone is the name of a product, which happens to run an operating system. So people tend to compare those, but it's not really, it's like apples and oranges. So for Android, I think most Android versions, depending on the vendor, will have device encryption, but not necessarily will encrypt the data on the SD card. So if there's something on there that, maybe you made a picture of your recovery codes and you ran out of space on your device and it's now on the SD card, if I tomorrow steal your phone, I can still get the SD card out if it's an Android device. So watch out what you're saving on those things. Make sure that you have a passcode on there that is not the same passcode you use everywhere. So make sure it's unique. Make sure that you are able to restore the device using a different device that is in a secure location. And also, as said, there are ways of setting passwords per application. So if you are really paranoid about the bank account, or maybe you have a shared account with, I don't know, maybe your grandmother or whatever, and someone, you lose your phone at a party, that should be fine. That should be fine. As long as you can quickly go home, use a different device to then lock that device. If they haven't put it in a cookie jar or a Doritos bag, you'll be able to remotely wipe it if you want. But you want to make sure that you have at least some recourse and some control over your account. I cannot tell you how many times I've helped Fortune 500 companies in trying to reduce their security. Because there is such a thing as too much security or doing security in the wrong way. I'll give you an example. Someone is waiting for the bus. Someone comes along on a bicycle and snatches their phone out of their hand. Goodbye, phone. Okay, great. Luckily, that person worked for a company that had a process for this, right? Not to worry. I'll just call the help desk. With what? The phone that was just stolen. I'll find a payphone. Well, this isn't the 90s. No more payphones. I'll just wait. I can't do anything, can I? Should I ask someone to use their phone? Yeah, we've all heard that one. Can I see your phone? So what do? So you need to, again, do this threat modeling exercise and figure out, okay, if this happens, and again, is someone going to snatch the phone out of the hand of one of your employees? Probably not. You know what's going to happen? They're going to leave the phone in the airplane, in the taxi. It's going to slip in between the seats on the bus. That's what's going to happen. So if I need to give one tip to startups, which is start with the easy stuff. Start with the stuff that is 100% going to happen, which is you're at a party, a few glasses of substances were had, of alcoholic beverages, someone pushes you in the pool, you still had your phone in your pocket, didn't you? Oh yeah, now I can't log on to that conference call with my investor the next Monday because the way that I access that is through the one email account that I access through my phone. Start with the stupid stuff. How about you have a backup tablet somewhere? How about you have a second device or a refurbished older phone or whatever it is? So think about the things, make sure that there's not a single point of failure, and kind of move backwards from there to see what would work. Where are the attacks going to come from? Which is 99% from the internet, and then kind of perform or execute accordingly, I would say.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Tom, would you like to say something to our audience?
Well, I would say, as I already said during our conversation, is you do not need to become paranoid. You do not need to become scared about what's happening, but you do need to understand that you have shared responsibility for not just your information, but the information you will be interacting with your customers, your investors, your suppliers. Start with the very simple stuff, which is continuity of your service, making sure you have transparency about where your data is and who can access it, and be the person that asks the quote unquote stupid questions. You might not always be able to change things or be the decision maker, but what you can do is take a cup of coffee or tea and then kind of with the cup rattle the cage a little bit and ask the stupid questions so that all of us are a little bit more informed as far as where everyone's responsibility starts and where it ends.
Maybe some of the audience is now interested in your professional consultancy or your professional help. What would you recommend?
Well, I run a startup called HackerMinded because it is my mission, after more than 23 years of being a security consultant and ethical hacker, is I see a need for bespoke and custom consultancy and advice. I mean, security has become a very, very big market. There's a lot of cookie cutter approaches out there. For some things, you can use cookie cutter approaches, but every startup is different. So people need in-depth experience. They need a pragmatic approach. And of course, above all, we just need to use common sense and be able to look each other in the eye on what it is that we're saying and what it is that we're doing. And that is the reason why I founded my company to, dare I say, make companies and startups a little bit more hacker-minded.
Amazing. Thank you so much for so many valuable advice. Maybe you prevented several big issues and smaller issues from our audience and from the host.
I certainly hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.